What if I told you that in the 17th century, Europe was a giant chessboard where kings played for absolute power, religions clashed in brutal wars, and everyday life was being transformed by a hidden economic revolution? This is not just about dusty crowns and old maps. This is about the birth of modern states, the struggle for fundamental rights, and the forces that literally built and broke nations. Get ready to unravel the complex web of power, profit, and piety. Coming up next on AP History Help, we're diving deep into absolutism and constitutionalism, the epic showdown that defined Europe's destiny. You do not want to miss this. Hello, history students. Welcome back to the AP History Help podcast, your ultimate guide to conquering AP history. I'm your host, Wendy, and today we are embarking on a deep dive into AP European History Unit 3, covering the tumultuous and transformative period from roughly 1648 to 1815. But specifically today, we're focusing on the foundational concepts of absolutism and constitutionalism. This unit isn't just a list of kings and queens. It's about the fundamental clash of ideas regarding how a country should be governed. Should one ruler hold all the power, or should power be shared and limited? And how did massive economic changes and religious conflicts play into all of this? Get ready, because Europe in this era is a wild ride of war and wealth and power grabs. So come on in, students, have a seat and grab your notes. Let's get started on understanding the very nature of power in early modern Europe. All right, so let's set the stage here. We are in the 17th and 18th centuries, a period still reeling from the wars of religion that we touched on last time in Unit 2, and witnessing incredible economic shifts. This era gives us two main models for how states tried to consolidate power and maintain order: absolutism and constitutionalism. And I know what you're thinking. This is the third time she said those words, and she still hasn't told us what they mean. Well, think of it like this. Absolutism is the King Kong of government. The monarch holds all the power, often claiming divine right, meaning God chose them, so don't even think about questioning their authority. Their word is law, and they answer to no one except theoretically God. Famous examples include in France under Louis XIV or Russia under Peter the Great. Now, on the other side from absolutism is constitutionalism. It's more like a checks and balances system. We touched on that last episode when covering the Age of Enlightenment as a deep dive topic. Anyway, the monarch's power is limited by laws, a constitution, or a representative body like a parliament. They share power, and there are rules even the king or queen has to follow. So the poster children for this are England and later Great Britain. But what drove these different paths? Why did some nations go all in on absolute power, while others gravitated towards shared authority? We need to look at the forces of religion and economics. In Unit 2, we wrapped up talking about the Reformation and its immediate aftermath. Well, the religious conflicts didn't just vanish. The wars of religion, particularly the 30 Years' War, left Europe utterly devastated. Estimates suggest millions died. Entire regions were depopulated, and the continent, it was in chaos. This widespread destruction actually paved the way for absolutism in many places. Think about it. After decades of brutal religious fighting, People were desperate for stability. A powerful monarch who could impose order, enforce a single religion, or at least a clear policy on religious minorities, and prevent further internal strife, that all seemed like a pretty good idea. And the idea was, if we give one person all the power, maybe they can stop us from killing each other over God. This is a key example of how a major causation, religious devastation, led to a significant change in political structure. Simultaneously, Europe was undergoing a massive economic transformation, the commercial revolution. This wasn't a single event, but a gradual shift in how economies worked, driven by global trade, new financial practices, and the rise of a powerful merchant class. So think about it. New trade routes to the Americas, Asia, and Africa brought in unprecedented amounts of silver and gold, known as the price revolution. New business practices emerged, like joint stock companies, like the British East India Company. Banks and stock exchanges made it easier to pool money and fund large-scale ventures. The concept of mercantilism or mercantilism, you can say it either way. I've looked it up. The concept of mercantilism dominated. That was the idea that a nation's wealth was measured by its gold and silver reserves, and that governments should regulate trade to achieve a favorable balance. In other words, export more than you import. This led to intense competition between European powers to establish colonies and control resources. Now, the commercial revolution profoundly impacted both absolute and constitutional states. For absolutist monarchs, controlling these new economic resources was crucial. Louis XIV, for example, used mercantilist policies guided by his finance minister Colbert to fund his massive army, his lavish court at Versailles, and ambitious wars. And he saw wealth as a direct tool for state power. Now, for constitutional states like England, the rising merchant class gained significant influence in Parliament. These wealthy commoners who were investing in trade and commerce, they demanded a greater say in how the country was run, especially when it came to taxes and economic policy. This economic power gave them leverage to limit the monarch's power, pushing towards constitutionalism. Let's put some faces to these ideas. I've mentioned a few of them, starting with the epitome of absolutism, France under Louis XIV. Now, he famously declared, "L'État, c'est moi." Now, I never took French, but I think I did a pretty good job of saying that. Basically, what he said in French, in English, means, "I am the state." And he built the magnificent palace of Versailles, not just as a home, but as a tool to control his nobility, drawing them away from their regional power bases and into his gilded cage. His wars were almost constant, aimed at expanding French power, though often at great cost. And he revoked the Edict of Nantes, ending religious toleration for Protestants, or Huguenots, as they were known in France, and demonstrating his desire for religious uniformity and absolute control. Now, let's pivot to England, a nation that took a very different path, ultimately leading to constitutional monarchy. Here, the power struggle wasn't just between different factions. It was a fundamental fight between the monarch and the parliament over who held supreme authority. The English Civil War in the mid-17th century saw King Charles I literally lose his head, yes, for trying to assert absolute power. This trauma led to a brief republic, then the restoration of the monarchy. But the idea that the king's power could be challenged was firmly established. The Glorious Revolution of 1688 was a watershed moment.
Parliament, fearing a return to Catholic absolutism under James II, invited William and Mary to take the throne. But there was a catch. They had to accept the English Bill of Rights. This document fundamentally limited royal power, guaranteed parliamentary supremacy, and it established the principle that the monarchs ruled by the consent of Parliament, not by divine right. This is a crucial example of change over time in political systems. Now, while England was forging its path to constitutional monarchy, another European power was demonstrating a different but equally impactful model of limited government and economic success, the Dutch Republic, experiencing its golden age. Now, unlike the monarchies of England or France, the Dutch Republic was a unique case. It was a decentralized state, a republic governed by wealthy merchants and an elected states general. They were champions of religious toleration, attracting skilled workers and intellectuals from across Europe, fostering innovation. Economically, their success was phenomenal, driven by maritime trade, financial innovations like the Amsterdam Exchange Bank, and their dominance in shipping and colonial ventures. Their prosperity built on a system of limited government and commercial enterprise, and it stood in stark contrast to the absolute monarchies, providing another powerful model for how a state could thrive without a king holding all the cards. The rise of powerful states, whether absolute like France or constitutional like England and the Dutch Republic, naturally led to intense competition. And this competition brings us to a crucial concept of the era, the balance of power. European states were constantly trying to prevent any single nation from becoming too dominant and threatening to the others. If one country, say France under Louis XIV, grew too powerful, a coalition of other states, like England, the Dutch Republic, and the Holy Roman Empire, would form to counter that power. Think of it like a never-ending geopolitical tug-of-war. This wasn't about peace. It was about maintaining a precarious equilibrium, often through a series of wars like the War of Spanish Succession. Now, these conflicts, while devastating, were seen as necessary to prevent a universal monarchy from emerging and swallowing up smaller, weaker states. All right, y'all, it's time for a fun fact. Get loose, get comfy. This fun fact, it dives into the messy, dramatic, often bloody history of English power struggles, which really set the stage for later constitutional questions. Forget reality TV drama. 15th century England, they had the War of the Roses. Now, this wasn't about flowers, but it was about two powerful noble families. The House of Lancaster, whose emblem was a red rose, and the House of York, whose emblem was a white rose. War of the Roses. And they were fighting for control of the English throne. It was decades of civil war, betrayals, and power shifts that left the country exhausted. But that's not the fun fact, y'all. So with this, or within this, we get one of history's most enduring mysteries, known as the princes in the tower. Not princess, like prince, like plural for one prince. The princes in the tower. I'm being very careful at how I enunciate that. Now, after King Edward IV died, his young son, Edward V, was set to inherit the throne. But his uncle, Richard, quickly moved the young King Edward V and his younger brother, Richard, into the Tower of London, supposedly for their protection. Now, they were never seen again. Richard seized the throne becoming King Richard III. And to this day, no one really knows for sure exactly what happened to those boys. But the suspicion that Richard murdered them to secure his power cemented his villainous image and inspired Shakespeare. And this dark episode illustrates the brutal, no holds barred nature of gaining and holding political power before constitutional limits truly took hold. It's a gripping reminder of what happens when power is absolute and unchecked, and how oftentimes fiction is based in reality. So, as you can see, the path to either absolutism or constitutionalism was heavily influenced by the devastation of religious wars and the opportunities and challenges of the commercial revolution. In absolutist states like France, the monarch emerged as the supreme authority, wielding centralized power over the economy, the church, and the military, often for reasons of perceived stability after chaos. And in constitutional states like England, the rise of Parliament, rising power of Parliament, and the wealthy merchant class, combined with a history of challenging royal authority, led to a system where the monarch's power was legally limited, laying the groundwork for modern democratic principles. Now, both systems were attempts to bring order to a changing world. They took vastly different approaches, shaping the future of their nation in profound ways. Understanding this comparison is a key to grasping the trajectory of European history. And that, my AP History helpers, brings us to the end of our exploration of, I'm going to say it one more time, absolutism and constitutionalism in AP European history. I hope you've gained a clearer picture that is going to guide you through Unit 3 and have a better understanding of these competing visions for state power and their deep roots in economic and religious landscapes of the era. Now, don't forget, little me over here, don't forget to subscribe, rate, even review the podcast would be great wherever you listen. And follow me on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. You can also find me on Substack and the AP History Help website, where I have like free resources available. Your support, however you choose to give it, just means the world to me. And it helps other students to find the podcast. You know, it helps with that algorithm. Next time on AP History Help, we are shifting our focus to a massive global phenomenon. We'll be looking into how human movement has shaped history across all three of the AP courses, World, US, and Euro. That's right, it's another deep dive into a multi-topical topic, a multi-course topic. It's a topic that connects everyone, everywhere, at every time. You're not going to want to miss it. We're going deep into migrations. And with that, this episode of the AP History Help podcast is now history.